That night was supposed to be a celebration of Anderson Holdings' most successful quarter ever. The company my father-in-law built from nothing was now worth billions, and every executive and board member had gathered at the Waldorf to toast their success. I stood near the bar, trying to blend into the background. My black dress was modest, nothing like the designer gowns the other wives wore, but I wasn't just any wife. I was Edward Anderson's daughter-in-law, the woman who had trapped his golden boy, as he liked to say when he thought I couldn't hear. "Rebecca, darling," my husband James whispered, sliding his arm around my waist. "Father wants us at the main table." I nodded, forcing a smile. 5 years of marriage to James had taught me how to keep my composure in front of the Anderson clan. Of course. We walked toward the grand table where Edward Anderson sat like a king holding court. At 68, he still commanded the room with steel grey eyes that had brokered billion-dollar deals and crushed competitors. Those eyes narrowed slightly when they landed on me. "Ah, James, there you are," Edward boomed, standing to clap his son on the shoulder. "And Rebecca." "Good evening, Edward," I said politely. He had never allowed me to call him anything more familiar. "Good evening. I was just telling the board about James's brilliant acquisition strategy. 30% growth. My son is proving himself worthy of the Anderson name." James beamed under his father's praise. I knew how much he craved it, how desperately he wanted to live up to the impossible standards Edward set. "James has always been brilliant," I said, giving my husband's hand a squeeze. Edward's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Yes, well, he came by it honestly." Dinner proceeded with the usual conversation about markets, competitors, and the future of Anderson Holdings. I remained quiet, picking at my salmon while Edward dominated the conversation. The wine steward came by, pouring expensive Bordeaux into crystal glasses. "Rebecca," Edward said suddenly, gesturing toward my nearly empty glass. "More wine?" "No, thank you," I replied. "I'm fine." "Are you sure? You always seemed to enjoy wine at university. Wasn't that where you met James? At that, what was it, some sort of campus bar?" The table went quiet. James shifted uncomfortably beside me. "We met at a charity fundraiser, actually," I corrected gently. "For children's literacy." Edward waved his hand dismissively. Right. Before you dropped out to... what was it again?" "I didn't drop out," I said, my voice steady despite the burning in my chest. "I completed my master's in business administration." "From that online program, yes?" Edward smirked, looking around the table as if sharing a private joke. James cleared his throat. "Father, Rebecca graduated with honors." "Of course she did," Edward interrupted. "Our Rebecca is full of surprises, isn't she?" The tension at the table was palpable. These people weren't my friends. They were Edward's loyalists, board members who owed their fortunes to him. None would dare contradict him. "Mr. Anderson," a waiter appeared at Edward's side. "The special reserve you requested." "Ah, perfect timing. This, everyone, is a 1982 Chateau Lafite Rothschild. Only 6 bottles left in the world." Edward gestured grandly as the waiter displayed the bottle. As the waiter began to pour, Edward continued. "You know, a wine like this requires appreciation, understanding, a refined palate developed over years." His eyes found mine again. I knew what was coming. Not everyone at this table would recognize its value. Some people are more accustomed to... What was that swill they served at your parents' anniversary party, Rebecca? Some sort of homemade thing. My parents had served wine from a small local vineyard they'd supported since its beginning. It was actually quite good, but more importantly, it had meaning to them. "It was from Hillside Vineyards," I said. "A family-owned business my parents have supported for 20 years. Edward chuckled. "Yes, well, not everyone can afford the finer things. Speaking of which, James tells me your father's hardware store is struggling again." James stiffened beside me. My father's small chain of hardware stores had weathered the pandemic, but competition from big box retailers had made things difficult. "They're doing fine," I said, though Edward knew perfectly well they weren't. He had offered to help once, with a predatory loan that would have eventually forced my father to sell to one of Edward's holding companies. "Fine?" Edward raised an eyebrow. "That's not what I heard. Perhaps your father should have focused more on business and less on... What was it he used to do? Coach Little League." I felt my composure slipping. My father had coached youth baseball for 30 years, mentoring hundreds of kids who still came back to visit him. It was one of many things that made him twice the man Edward would ever be. The wine steward approached again. I held out my glass, needing something to calm my nerves. Edward's laugh cut through the moment. Now, Rebecca. Maybe you should slow down. We wouldn't want a repeat of the Christmas party." There had been no incident at the Christmas party. It was a complete fabrication, but delivered with such confidence that several people at the table exchanged knowing glances. "I don't recall any issue at Christmas," I said, my voice tight. "No, well, perhaps I'm mistaken. All these company events blur together after a while, though some people do stand out." He looked pointedly at me, especially those who don't quite belong. The table fell silent. The message was clear. I didn't belong here. I never had. James sat frozen beside me, his eyes on his plate. He wouldn't defend me. Not against his father, never against his father. I set down my napkin, preparing to excuse myself before I said something I'd regret, when Edward delivered his final blow. "You know," he said loudly, ensuring everyone would hear, "when you're at events like this, Rebecca, it's important to remember your place. You're not an executive. You're not on the board. You're simply James's wife." He raised his glass, his eyes cold. "Essentially, you're just pouring wine." The table went silent. I felt my face burn as every eye turned to me. 5 years of insults, of passive-aggressive comments, of watching James shrink under his father's thumb. It all came to a head in that moment. But before I could respond, a tall security guard in a black suit approached our table. For a wild moment I thought Edward had arranged to have me removed. Instead, the man leaned down and whispered, "Ma'am, it's time." Edward frowned. "What's the meaning of this? We're in the middle of dinner." The security guard straightened, his expression professionally neutral. "I'm sorry for the interruption, sir, but we have instructions to escort Ms. Rebecca at precisely 8:30. "Instructions from whom?" Edward demanded. The guard smiled slightly. "From Ms. Rebecca herself, sir." I stood, smoothing my dress. "Thank you, Michael. Please tell them I'll be right there." Edward's face reddened. "What is this? James, what is she doing?" James looked as confused as his father. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. "Rebecca," he said, half rising. "What's going on?" I looked around the table at the faces of people who had watched me be humiliated for years and never said a word. Then I turned to my husband. "I'm sorry you have to find out this way, James. I truly am. But perhaps it's fitting that you learn the truth here, in front of everyone." I turned to address the entire table, my voice steady. "For the past 18 months, I've been working on something that required absolute secrecy, especially from Anderson Holdings." Edward scoffed. "What could you possibly—" "I've been leading the acquisition team at Vertex Capital," I continued, speaking over him. "We've been quietly buying up shares of Anderson Holdings through various shell companies." The blood drained from Edward's face. That's not possible." I smiled. "Not only possible, but complete. As of 4:30 this afternoon, when the last transaction cleared, Vertex Capital now owns 51% of Anderson Holdings." The table erupted in shocked murmurs. Board members frantically pulled out phones, checking the information. "This is absurd," Edward sputtered. "Who the hell is Vertex Capital?" I am, I said simply, along with a consortium of investors who believe Anderson Holdings has been mismanaged. Edward slammed his fist on the table, making the crystal jump. James, did you know about this? My husband sat frozen, his face ashen. No, Father, I had no idea. He didn't, I confirmed. James has been kept entirely in the dark, both by his father and by me. The difference is, I'm about to start being honest with him. I turned to my husband. James, your father has been systematically stripping assets from Anderson Holdings for years, inflating values and hiding losses. He's been preparing to sell the company to Meridian Group, who would break it apart and lay off 80% of the workforce. That's a lie, Edward shouted, his composure finally cracking. The SEC doesn't think so, I replied calmly. They've been building a case for months with my help. You little... Choose your next words very carefully, Edward, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. As of this moment, I control the company, and tomorrow morning, the board will be voting on new leadership. The security guard cleared his throat. Ms. Rebecca, they're waiting. I nodded, then looked back at the stunned faces around the table. Ladies and gentlemen of the board, I suggest you check your emails. You'll find detailed information about Edward's financial manipulations, along with a proposal for restructuring that will save the company and every job within it. I picked up my purse. The meeting will start at 9 a.m. sharp. I expect full attendance. Edward was almost purple with rage. This is preposterous. You think these people will follow you? You're nothing. You're nobody. I leaned in close, my voice for him alone. I'm the woman who just took everything from you, Edward. And I did it right under your nose while you were busy underestimating me. Straightening, I addressed the table once more. Oh, and that wine you're drinking? The 1982 Chateau whatever? It's a 2018 Napa Valley Red that retails for about $40. Edward's been swapping labels for years to impress you all. Just another one of his frauds. As if on cue, the doors to the private dining room opened. Standing there was a group of men and women in suits, the executive team from Vertex Capital, along with 2 SEC agents. You planned this, Edward whispered, the reality of his situation finally sinking in. You planned this entire evening. Yes, I admitted. I wanted witnesses when you showed your true colors, and you didn't disappoint. I turned to go, then paused. Oh, and that online program I graduated from? It was Harvard Business School's executive education program. I completed it at night after spending my days gathering evidence against you, and that swill from my parents' anniversary. It won the International Wine Championship in Vienna last year. I looked at my husband, whose world was collapsing around him. James, I'm sorry. I did try to get you to see who your father really was. For 5 years, I tried, but you chose not to see it. Rebecca, he began, his voice breaking. I never knew. I didn't think. That's the problem, I said gently. You never did think for yourself. That's why you're named in the SEC complaint as well, not as a primary actor, but as a willing participant. James paled. What? But I didn't do anything. Exactly, I said. You saw the discrepancies in the books. You noticed the shell companies, but you signed off on everything anyway, because your father told you to. I looked at my watch. The car waiting outside will take you to your lawyer's office. He's expecting you. If you cooperate fully, you might avoid jail time. I began walking toward the door, then turned back one last time. And James, I've filed for divorce. The papers are with your lawyer as well. As I walked out of the dining room, flanked by security and my executive team, I heard the chaos erupting behind me. Edward was shouting, board members were arguing, and somewhere in the middle of it all, James was calling my name, but I didn't look back. 5 years of my life had been spent trying to save a man who didn't want to be saved, and a company that employed thousands of innocent people. I had finally accomplished one of those goals. Outside, a sleek black car waited at the curb. As the driver opened the door for me, my assistant handed me a tablet. "The press release is ready to go," she said, "and your parents are on their way to the penthouse as you requested." I nodded, taking a deep breath of the cool night air. "Thank you, Sarah. Ms. Ms. Taylor," she corrected herself using my maiden name. "May I say something?" "Of course," she smiled. "That was absolutely brilliant. When you walked into the firm 3 years ago and laid out this plan, I thought you were either crazy or a genius." I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in years. The line between the two can be quite thin. As the car pulled away from the curb, I looked back at the glittering hotel. Somewhere inside, Edward Anderson was realizing that the woman he'd dismissed as just pouring wine had just served him the most expensive glass of his life. And I had to admit, the taste of justice was even sweeter than I'd imagined. The next morning, I stood at the window of the Vertex Capital conference room, watching the city come to life 40 stories below. Dawn painted the skyscrapers in gold and pink, a new day rising. Fitting, I thought, for what was about to happen. "Ms. Taylor?" My assistant's voice pulled me from my thoughts. "They're all here." I turned to face the long mahogany table where 12 people sat waiting, the complete board of Anderson Holdings. Conspicuously absent were Edward and James. Edward was currently meeting with his legal team, while James, according to my sources, had spent the night in his lawyer's office, going through documents and realizing just how much trouble he was in. "Thank you all for coming," I said, taking my place at the head of the table, a position that until yesterday would have been unthinkable for me. Thomas Bryson, the longest-serving board member and Edward's close friend, spoke first. "This is highly irregular, Rebecca. Edward should be here." "Mr. Anderson was invited," I replied coolly. "He declined through his attorney, and please call me Ms. Taylor. I've resumed using my maiden name." "Whatever game you're playing," Thomas began. "This isn't a game," I cut him off. "This is business, something this board has forgotten while serving as Edward's rubber stamp for the past decade." I nodded to my assistant, who distributed folders to each board member. "Inside, you'll find forensic accounting reports documenting Edward's systematic looting of Anderson Holdings. Shell companies, inflated valuations, hidden losses, it's all there. You'll also find copies of Edward's correspondence with Meridian Group regarding their planned acquisition and dismantling of the company." As they flipped through the damning evidence, I continued, "The SEC has enough to bring charges against Edward, James, and potentially every person at this table for failure of fiduciary duty." The room went deathly quiet. "However," I said, softening my tone slightly, "I recognize that most of you were kept in the dark about the full extent of these activities. Edward compartmentalized information, showing each of you only what he wanted you to see." "Why are you doing this?" asked Patricia Winters, one of the few board members I actually respected. "Revenge?" I met her gaze steadily. "If I wanted revenge, I would have gone straight to the SEC without warning any of you. No, this is about saving a company that employs over 15,000 people. Moving to a screen at the front of the room, I brought up a presentation. This is my proposal for restructuring Anderson Holdings. We maintain core operations, divest certain problematic acquisitions Edward made, and refocus on the sectors where we have competitive advantage." For the next 30 minutes, I walked them through the plan I'd spent 18 months developing. A plan that would not only save Anderson Holdings, but potentially make it stronger than ever. When I finished, there was a different kind of silence in the room, one tinged with reluctant admiration. "This is actually quite impressive," admitted Thomas, sounding surprised despite himself. "But why should we trust you? You've been deceiving everyone for years." "I've been working to save this company for years," I corrected. "And as for why you should trust me, Because unlike Edward, I'm not asking for blind faith. Everything I've presented is verifiable. The numbers speak for themselves. Patricia leaned forward. What happens if we don't approve your plan? Then Vertex Capital, as majority shareholder, will install a new board that will. Thomas bristled. That's a threat. It's business, I countered. Something Edward taught me quite well, though not in the way he intended. Every time he belittled me, every time he dismissed my ideas, every time he treated me as nothing more than an ornament on his son's arm, I was learning. I closed my laptop. I'm offering you all a chance to be part of the solution, to help rebuild what Edward nearly destroyed, or you can walk away and explain to the SEC why you missed the warning signs for so long. One by one, they began nodding, even Thomas, though his expression remained sour. There is one more thing, I said, opening a final document on the screen, Edward's termination agreement. This caused a stir around the table. You're firing Edward from his own company? Someone asked incredulously. I'm offering him a dignified exit, I clarified. Full benefits, a generous severance, and most importantly, a chance to avoid jail time if he cooperates with the SEC investigation. And if he refuses, Thomas asked, then he can explain to a jury why he was planning to sell out 15,000 employees for his personal gain, I said, my voice hardening. I'm offering mercy, not weakness. After a tense vote, the motion passed unanimously. Edward Anderson would no longer be CEO of Anderson Holdings. The company he had built, then nearly destroyed, was no longer his. As the board members filed out, Patricia lingered behind. I underestimated you, she said quietly. We all did. I nodded. That was the idea. How did you do it? The acquisition? It must have cost billions. I started with my own trust fund, the one my grandfather left me that Edward didn't know about. Used that to make some key investments, built it up, attracted the right partners. Then I approached investors who had been burned by Edward in the past. Turns out there were quite a few looking for payback. Patricia shook her head in amazement. All this time. What about James? Did you ever love him? The question stung more than I expected. Yes, I admitted. I loved the man I thought he could be, the man I hoped he would become once he stepped out from under his father's shadow. And now, I sighed. Now I hope he cooperates fully with the investigation. He's not evil, Patricia, just weak, too afraid of his father to stand up for what's right. As Patricia left, my phone rang. It was my security chief. Ms. Taylor, Edward Anderson is in the lobby. He's demanding to see you. I closed my eyes briefly, centering myself. Send him up, but keep security close. 5 minutes later, Edward burst into the conference room, his face mottled with rage. Gone was the carefully cultivated image of the sophisticated business titan. This was Edward stripped bare, furious, desperate, and dangerous. You backstabbing little gold digger, he snarled. You think you can take my company? My life's work? I remained seated, outwardly calm despite my racing heart. The board has already voted, Edward. It's done. The board? He spat. Those spineless sycophants, I made them. I can break them. Not anymore, I said. They've seen the evidence. They know what you were planning to do. He stalked toward me, fists clenched. You conniving bitch. I knew from the moment James brought you home that you were trouble. Common, unworthy. I stood slowly, refusing to be intimidated. And that was your mistake, Edward. You were so convinced of my inferiority that you never saw me as a threat. Even as I was dismantling your empire piece by piece, you were still making jokes about my family's wine. Your family, he sneered. A failed hardware store owner and a kindergarten teacher. What could they possibly have taught you about business? Integrity, I said simply. Something you know nothing about. He lunged forward, slamming his hands on the table. I built this company from nothing. Nothing. You have no right. You built it, then you betrayed it, I cut in. You were going to sell out thousands of loyal employees who made you rich, people who trusted you. Business isn't about trust, he growled. It's about winning. And you've lost, I said, sliding a document across the table. This is your severance agreement. Sign it, cooperate with the SEC, and you get to keep your freedom and your dignity. Refuse, and I release everything to the press. Edward stared at the paper, then back at me with pure hatred. You think you've won? You're nothing without the Anderson name. I smiled then, feeling a strange pity for this man who had terrorized me for years, but now seemed so small. I was Rebecca Taylor before I met your son. I'll be Rebecca Taylor after. The only difference is now everyone will know my name, and not just as someone's wife. His hand trembled as he reached for the document. James will never forgive you for this. Perhaps not, I acknowledged, but he'll never forgive you either, once he realizes how you used him. As Edward picked up the pen, security standing watchfully by the door, I felt no triumph, only relief that this chapter was finally closing. Edward signed with an angry flourish, then threw the pen across the room. Enjoy it while it lasts, he hissed. You have no idea what you've gotten yourself into. But as he stormed out, we both knew the truth. I knew exactly what I was doing, and that was what terrified him most of all. 3 months later, I stood at the podium in Anderson Holdings' largest manufacturing facility, addressing hundreds of employees gathered for the announcement. Behind me hung the new company banner, Taylor Anderson Global. Today marks not just a new name, but a new beginning, one built on transparency, integrity, and a commitment to every person who makes this company what it is. The crowd applauded, tentatively at first, then with growing enthusiasm. These were people who had feared for their jobs when rumors of the Meridian deal leaked. Now they were seeing wage increases, improved benefits, and profit-sharing programs. I can't promise it will always be easy, I continued, but I can promise you this. We will face challenges together as one company. Your jobs will never be sacrificed for short-term gains or executive bonuses. This brought a standing ovation. As the applause washed over me, I reflected on the journey here. The business world had been stunned by the revelations after Edward's resignation, not just by his misconduct, but by how I had orchestrated the takeover. Financial Times called it the most remarkable corporate coup in decades. Forbes ran a profile titled, "The Woman Who Outsmarted the Smartest Man in the Room." James had cooperated with investigators, trading testimony against his father for immunity. Our divorce finalized without drama. He hadn't contested a single point. Last I heard, he was living in our old Hamptons house, writing a memoir about growing up under Edward's thumb. Edward hadn't fared as well. Despite the deal I'd offered, he couldn't help trying to hide assets and obstruct the investigation. The SEC revoked his immunity, and he now faced federal charges. The man who once commanded boardrooms was reduced to giving depositions and meeting with public defenders. After my speech, Patricia Winters approached me on the factory floor. "Remarkable," she said. "Production up 22%, morale at an all-time high, and our stock has stabilized." I nodded, watching engineers collaborate over a prototype. People work harder when they know their work is valued. "The board is impressed," Patricia continued. "Many thought you were just in it for revenge." "Revenge is a luxury I couldn't afford," I replied. "Too many lives depended on getting this right." As we walked, workers called out respectful greetings, not the fearful deference they had shown Edward, but genuine respect. "You know," Patricia said, "I've been thinking about that night at the Waldorf, when Edward said you were just pouring wine." I smiled. One of his many miscalculations. It revealed everything about him, and you. He saw service as beneath him, as weakness. You saw it as strength. Before leaving, I called my father. "Hi, Dad. There's my girl." His warm voice brought an immediate smile. "Just saw you on CNBC. Your mother was crying." Happy tears, I hope. The happiest. We're so proud of you, Becca. You and Mom still coming Sunday? I'm cooking. Wouldn't miss it. Your mother's bringing that wine from Hillside. Later, my phone rang unexpectedly. It was James. "Rebecca." His voice sounded different, clearer, less anxious. "I saw your speech today. And? You were right. About everything, about Father, about the company, about me." His voice cracked. "I was a coward." I closed my eyes. "You were his son, James. He programmed you from birth to seek his approval." "That's no excuse," he said firmly. "I knew what he was doing was wrong. I let him treat you terribly for years." "Why are you calling?" I asked gently. "To say thank you. You saved the company when I couldn't. All those jobs. And in a strange way, you saved me too, from becoming him. I'm glad you're finding clarity." "I've been seeing a therapist," he admitted. "The memoir I'm writing, it's not what people think. It's about accountability, acknowledging my part in everything." This surprised me. "That's good, James. I know we can't go back," he continued. "But I wanted you to know that I see you now. Really see you. And I'm sorry it took losing you to finally understand what I had." That night, as I prepared for the gala where I would announce a scholarship program for young women in business leadership, I thought about Edward's words. Just pouring wine. He thought he was putting me in my place. He never realized he was actually setting me free. The Edward Anderson era was over. Now I was filling cups with opportunity, with second chances, with the promise that no voice would be silenced, no talent overlooked, no person deemed unworthy because of where they came from. Sometimes the people who underestimate you most are the ones who ultimately make you unstoppable. And sometimes, when someone tells you that you're just pouring wine, the best response isn't words, it's actions, it's patience, it's the quiet, determined work of proving them wrong, not just for yourself, but for everyone who has ever been dismissed or underestimated. Edward's dismissive words had been meant as an ending. Instead, they had been just the beginning.